So today we have Kasey with us. Kasey's from Under Armour and their Innovation Center. Formerly Black Diamond, formerly Nike, formerly GM. Nice to meet you.
That's most of
All right. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Kasey.
Good morning, everyone. I know it's early. Feels early for me anyway. I'm glad to be here. This has been super nostalgic for me coming back to campus. I went to school here in the late 90s. I came here wanting to be a toy designer. They put me in an engineering program because I didn't know what industrial design was. Switched to graphic design, which I enjoyed, and I learned a ton of great fundamentals from two of the professors here. Alan Ashimoto was a graphic design professor here that was fantastic. And then John Anderson taught advertising here and also taught me some great kind of fundamentals of simplicity and design, things like that. I lived in Lundstrom Hall, which I don't even know if people can live there now, kind of up by the cemetery. So anyway, it's been fun for me to come and see, be back on campus and see this place. My plan today was to go through, I've worked at a few interesting places, go through really quickly some of my most enjoyable projects at each one of those places, and they all kind of have important design lessons that come with them. And then my last 6 months, I've been in Baltimore for the last 5 or 6 months, running design for Under Armour, and it's been a big effort to shift the design thinking, shift the design ethos, and I've learned a lot. So I wanted to share some of that too, and then of course leave you guys some time for questions if you have any. So I'm going to start with this, and I know I work for Under Armour. This is a Nike thing. I got my start in design when I was here. I was telling my parents this morning, I was on a mountain bike ride, I think it was the Juniper Trail, and I wasn't that happy with graphic design. I wanted to make stuff. And then I met a guy who was the designer at the local paper, the Herald Journal, is that right? Yep. And I was asking him about his job. He said, no, I'm just saving money so I can be an industrial designer. And I didn't know what that was really. We talked a little bit, and I thought, that's perfect for me. And he told me about Art Center's program. He told me about the CCS program, which were both really expensive. He also told me that BYU had a program. And so I got in my car and I drove to BYU that same night to find out about the industrial design program because it sounded so appealing to me. And it was perfect. As soon as I walked into the studio there, they were getting ready to they were working on a bunch of models. So there was Bondo dust and foam bits everywhere, people in their jumpers covered in dust, and there was someone laying on the ground with the Bondo mask, asleep in the middle of the whole place. They'd been up all night working on a model, and I thought, these are my people. This is the right place for me. And so I really have enjoyed this field as a profession. Some of the projects there led to me getting a job at General Motors, and I wasn't even a huge car guy, but I recognized the fact that GM had really talented designers, and I would learn a lot, that it would be a great experience for me and for my family. And so we moved to Detroit, and I started working for General Motors. And I'll show a few things here. So I work mostly in the off-road and the Hummer division. And when I got there, this is going back a ways, cars were big. Like Ford Excursion was big, Suburbans were big, gas was cheap, and SUVs almost couldn't get big enough. And we did a project with GM, and one of the other students made a Hummer motorhome that would fit a full-size Hummer in it. And his model was just massive. And I had spent a lot of time in the mountains, and I said, no, you've got to make Hummers really tiny. These mountain roads are tiny. You need to make something more like a Suzuki Samurai that's still a Hummer. And so that was my proposal. And that led to me getting a job there. And that was some of my first projects were these really tiny Hummers. And this is one. It was really a great time. I learned a lot about how companies make decisions when I was there. And they made a lot of really dumb decisions about the Hummer brand. And then, of course, the brand went out of business. But while I was working in Hummer, we did a project with Nike where I got to come and spend time in Portland for a few weeks working with the ACG outerwear team because we used materials in the inside of the car. We used the seasonal color palette. We had the trail running guys, the whole team. They designed the floor mats and tire tread of the vehicle. So it was super cool. I don't even think I brought photos of that, but that led to me getting a job at Nike. From there, I was at Nike for 6 years. I worked in the innovation kitchen doing basketball footwear for the first 3 years, and then I switched over to the running team and did running footwear for 3. And then by that time I could tell, and you can just, at least for me, I can kind of tell when it's time to take on another professional challenge. And I was doing a presentation similar to this down at BYU, And I made a joke about skiing because I had designed a shoe made of scraps, and I compared it to going to a ski resort and skiing someone's leftover pass, like in the afternoon when they leave early. And so this guy from Black Diamond came up and said, "Hey, you mentioned skiing in your presentation. Would you want to go out in the morning?" And I said, I think I've got a lot of stuff in my parents' garage. They live in Midway or Heber. I said, if you can bring me some megawatts with O1s, skins, and an Abbey pack, I'd love to join you. And he said, okay, well, I've got a dentist appointment at 8:30 in the morning, so we got to ski at 4 in the morning. And so I met him at the mouth of Little Cottonwood, and we went up and skied something called Holy Toledo. I don't know if any of you have skied it. Fortunately, because I had been working on running shoes, I had been running quite a bit, so I could at least mostly keep up, because it was a pretty grueling skin track to get up to that ridgeline. And then Holy Toledo is pretty steep, and it's pretty narrow, and I was on telly stuff, and I hadn't been on telly stuff for quite a while, because we were living in, wherever we were living, in Oregon. And thankfully, I nailed all my turns, and it was just amazing. Like, powder, fantastic, the best way to start a day, and that was my job interview for Black Diamond, which turned out to be great. So then I ended up taking a job at Black Diamond Equipment here in Salt Lake, and I was there for almost 9 years and just loved it. A year ago this week, I went and had my first interview with Under Armour. And I know that sounds crazy to leave Black Diamond because it is such a dream job, and it still baffles me sometimes that I did that. That my family and I did that. But I started having these conversations with Under Armour, and I started learning about what they were doing, what they had the capability of doing, and I also had a lot of conversations with them about how I believed design should be run. And it's a little bit like they let me fly their fighter plane in a way. Like the president of Under Armour came to Midway to go backcountry skiing with me to talk about me taking that job. And so we did a long lap, and we took lots of rest breaks because he was coming from sea level, so we could just talk. And he said, "Why do you actually want to come to Under Armour?" And I said, "Well, professionally," I said, "personally, it'd be great for my family. We're all excited about a new opportunity." I said, "And professionally, I feel like by being a designer, an industrial designer at GM and at Nike, is a little bit like playing in the big leagues. Like, that's a big opportunity, and I was really grateful for that." At Black Diamond, it was a much smaller company, and I kind of moved into more of a kind of a coaching role. So I feel like I played in the majors, I got to coach in the minors. Going to Under Armour was a big step to see could I actually be a coach in the majors. That's what I felt like. So it was a big opportunity. It required them to trust me a lot, and we're right in the middle of that. We'll find out if I don't, hopefully I don't blow it. So anyway, that's why I took the job, and that's why I'm at Under Armour. So I'm going to go through some of these. This was one of those first Hummer projects that I worked on. Really, really enjoyable. And back in this time of my career, I spent a lot of time sketching and drawing. That's part of the automotive world, is a lot of time exploring concepts, just sketching. I've got a lot of friends working at car companies now. It's still that way. They do a lot of time visually exploring and then exploring in-plane models. I was drawing so much and so long that I was burning holes in my dress shirts. My right elbows kept getting holes in them. That might change now if you're on Cintiq, but I really, really enjoyed that part of the process and being there. I wanted to click through this really quick. This was one of my renderings, and I did a step-by-step for Wacom for a demo at some point, so this is just kind of fun to see. And I don't get to do this very often anymore, so it's good. This was my concept. It wasn't that great of a concept. I was basically saying, take GMCs and make them more like Hummers, and of course that wasn't a good business plan. But it was a really fun proposal to make. So then I got to Nike, and Nike, I was in the innovation kitchen, and that was a super fun place to be. Really, really smart people there, really great teams. And I learned some important lessons. This shoe was a shoe called the Dunk Hoop, and it wasn't the most popular shoe ever. I mean, it still isn't. But when I got there, we were really focused on basketball, and I asked our marketing partners. So I had 2 PLMs that I traveled everywhere with, and I would always ask them about this Nike kid. Like, who's this Nike kid who buys basketball shoes all the time? Well, he buys shoes every 60 to 90 days, and this is his age. He was 16 to 19 years old, buys shoes every 60 to 90 days, and our sales were tanking. And so we started heading out to these schools. We did a couple trips to New York. On one of the trips, we were hitting all the urban schools and watching kids practice, talking with the coaches. While the kids were changing in the locker rooms after practice, we'd go shoot around and just wait for them to come out of the locker room. And during practice, they would have 80-90% of them would be wearing Nike basketball shoes. After practice, it was all Vans, skinny jeans, sweater vests. Like nobody was wearing, sometimes Air Force Ones and Dunks, but nobody was wearing actual basketball shoes after practice. So we were walking down the street that night, and I saw another guy who looked like the Nike kid. And I turned to my PLM partners and I said, "Hey, this Nike kid you've been telling me about, he's 35 years old. He's the coach. The kids are not wearing basketball shoes right now." And so we started thinking about it, and part of the reason was that's right when jeans started to get skinny. If you're old enough to remember, back in the late 90s, and the skate shoes used to be super baggy, with giant puffy tongues, the laces went all the way across. You couldn't wear shoes like that with skinny jeans. So as soon as jeans got skinny, shoes got skinny, and basketball shoes were about a season or two late, just going on a diet. And so I made this shoe with that in mind, and so I based it on an old Blazer silhouette, a little bit of a Vans silhouette, and just a skinny basketball shoe. And this shoe, even though it was only maybe $85 to $100 price point, it wasn't our pinnacle product, it was still our best-selling shoe in 11 seasons, mainly because you could wear it. You could wear it with jeans. So that was a good lesson for me. We did a ton of colorways. That kind of darker contrast colorway, all the colorways were based on dunks, like famous dunks in history, like Vince Carter jumping over the French guy in the Olympics, and Dominique Wilkins doing his windmill thing, and these were all old basketball players. I designed, my favorite dunk was the two-finger dunk of Oreos in the milk. So that second colorway is my Oreo colorway, just because I wanted to be part of the fun. I thought this would be fun to see. This is the way my process has always worked, and it still works. And if I get to one of my other slides in the other half of this presentation, Zaha Hadid, the architect, I read a quote from her where with all the technology she uses and has used, she still starts by hand because of the kind of the organic, it's less restrained, there's just something there. So almost all my shoe designs, my product designs started in some version of a little thumbnail drawing like this. Plus you can just churn through them so quickly. I'll do these now on the iPad Pro, but I still have boxes and boxes of sketchbooks. And my pace was I was going through a fairly large sketchbook about once a quarter. It's just in meetings, in free time. That one with the star on the left was the one that I chose. That's it right there. And then this was a Photoshop rendering. At some point in my career, especially with certain design managers that I had, I learned that they can't see sketches. At one point I was doing a presentation in Europe, but I had a design deadline, and so I did a bunch of sketches of one of the lunar shoes, either the Lunar Glide or the Lunar Eclipse. And I sent them to our design director, and he emailed back, he's like, no, that's all wrong. That's not going to work. What about this? And he had taken my drawings and essentially erased all the line art and just filled it in more like cut and paste collaging kind of paper with texture. But the designs from my perspective were exactly the same. And so I thought, okay, he just can't see sketches. So I got to stop showing him sketches. So this is a technique I came up with, basically using Photoshop, a camera that didn't move, and like a lighting rig, so that I could render these really quickly to look mostly realistic, but they were faster than doing like a super detailed rendering that ended up kind of solving that problem. And then I thought I'd include this just because it showed some of my process of transferring that sketch onto a pattern. I did some pretty technical patterning work. I would pull out the calipers and the razor blade and really measure everything so that I made sure all the character and kind of the soul of the design would transfer onto the flat pattern. A lot of color work. At a company like Nike, color owns color, design doesn't own color. I'm trying to blend that better at Under Armour because designers spend so much time obsessing about their individual designs. They're spending weeks on a design, where a color team is usually spending hours or days. But I want both teams to own some of that responsibility. And then this is what the final one looked like. Not the best photo, but a really fun shoe. Some LeBron stuff. I don't want to go too deep into all this. This is the first 3D modeled shoe, though, that Nike did. And that's part of the reason Nike brought me from GM, was because we had a lot of 3D skills. And so I was using it. And a shoe like the LeBron, it just the tooling alone for each size is like $30,000. So to make a full size set is really expensive, and the lasts weren't fitting very well. And so we didn't want to risk all that money And I said, well, let's just 3D print one and try it on. So and GM had been using these soft, rubbery 3D printing materials. We literally called GM and said, can you send us a couple of buckets of that stuff? We printed the LeBron. We could try it on, and we could walk around, and we could tell if we had gotten the last right, and then we fixed it. So that was super fun to do. Jumping to Black Diamond, I was studying graphic design here, and I really enjoyed parts of it. I feel like those skills have come with me, across my career. These were some ski designs. At the time, we were paying a company in Burlington to do ski design work. I think we had 18 models or 16 models, and we were paying a lot of money, and they just weren't that good. And so I stayed up really, really late one night and came up with this concept for this sort of geometric gradient for our skis. It's a little dated now, but it was super cool 10 years ago. And then took it and spread it across our whole line, so each model had a bit of a theme, but then the whole line itself could kind of hang together. My favorite one by far is that second one from the left, the Megawatt. Still my favorite ski graphic ever, I think. And of course, it's mine, so I can say that. And then this is how we presented it at the trade show in Europe, which was really, really fun to see. It's fun to see things come to life like that. Camouflage the skis a little bit, but it drew tons of people into that wall in a big trade show. And then this project here, this was my first project at Black Diamond, was a helmet. And this was one of the kind of the presentation renderings for the idea. The whole idea behind this helmet, and I love using this example, even in my office now at Under Armour, I have two helmets sitting on the table. I've got this helmet, and I've got the Petzl Meteor. I don't know if any of you have used the Meteor. The first not Meteor, sorry, the Scirocco. The orange one with the wrinkles in it. The Scirocco and the Vapor, they both launched on the same day. And we were trying to be the lightest weight helmet. We actually shipped these things without headlamp clips so we could get the weight down a little bit to try to hit our target. And we thought we were going to be the lightest weight helmet on the market. The day we launched, the Scirocco was lighter and the Scirocco was safer. Because this dimension here, like the amount of foam on top of your head is really related to how safe it is. And if you've seen the movie Spaceballs, that's the safest helmet ever. You can take that safety mentality as far as you want and make really, really good helmets. And so by most industry measurements, we lost. Because Petzl was lighter, Petzl was safer, we both launched on the same day. They've already redesigned the Scirocco. This thing sold, I don't even know what the numbers were. I think our forecast was 1,200, maybe 2,000. I mean, I think the average is around 17,000 units a year now. And the philosophy here was, what is the safest helmet? Is it the helmet that measures the safest? Or is it the helmet that is just safe enough to be called a helmet that eliminates a lot of the reasons why people won't wear one? So helmets are too bulky, they're too hot, they're too heavy. We made it really light. We made it way less bulky by getting right down to the line of safety. It's still safe enough to be certified. It's still a helmet, but it's not the safest helmet. So it's light, it's breathable, the proportions, all the attention to the lines around your face, especially things on your face where you're going to see photos of yourself, have to be really, really good. So in the end, this still won. And so I love using, that's why I have the helmets on my desk in my office, because it's easy to start thinking that the best jacket is the lightest jacket, or the best shoe is the shoe that has the most traction or the most of something. It's easy to have the superlatives take over, and that's not right. It's the most thoughtful, the most considered, and I'll get into some of that in this next deck. But it's optimizing your design more than it is being the best at one thing in a lot of cases. And I just include this because it's fun. And this was a drawing I did on a bus in Taiwan. There was a really, really big guy on a tiny little scooter. I couldn't believe the scooter was even going. And I just did that little upper left-hand sketch just while I was on the bus. And I just, I would chip away at this in my office once in a while. And I decided in the end, because I didn't want to make fun of anyone, I would just make a really big version of myself riding the little motorcycle that I used to have. So. And then this is my family. My oldest son is back in the back with my parents. And we have a new baby that's not in this photo, but she hasn't been on the ski lift with us yet. And I like to include this because I think thinking about your family and thinking about where you want to live and the kind of experience you want to have with them is an important part of your career decisions. I mean, that's been just as much part of our decision making as the companies or what the job opportunities have been like. And believe it or not, my whole family, my kids, are all excited about being in Baltimore. I think I'm the least excited about being in Baltimore from a recreation standpoint, but it's the right thing for our family right now, and we're having a good time. Okay. Any questions about that stuff? We can do a little mid-cycle question and answer if anyone wants to.
You mentioned earlier that you consider yourself as a coach. What does that mean?
That's a good question. As you move through as you progress in your career, when I was a senior designer, I was focused on the 1 or 2 shoes, sometimes 3 shoes a season, and I was obsessed. I think that's part of what makes design fun is you get super obsessed. You're very emotionally, connected to the project you're working on. And so when people criticize it, it really sucks. But that's what makes it so rewarding. But you're really thinking about your stuff and you're thinking about it sometimes weeks or months consistently. As soon as you're a design director, you all of a sudden have a different point of view. You're looking at not just that one designer's work, you gotta look at all of it. And you gotta figure out how to make it all connect so that it looks like it comes from a brand, but then not lose that individuality and the personality of the actual designers working on it. I think that's important. Other brands don't agree with that. They want everything to look the same. And that's a philosophical difference that I have. So as you move up, and then in my job now, I have the same design challenge. I need Under Armour product to all hit a certain standard and to all look kind of a certain way, but then each category still needs to have its own point of view. So football needs to look like football. Golf needs to look like golf. We have a problem right now where train and run, they kind of get in each other's business a little bit. Nike's had that problem for years too, because where does that blurry line end between train and run? So that's kind of what I'm talking about. It's a gradual shift from focusing on the actual designs, which is super rewarding, to focusing on collections or divisions of design, to then thinking about a whole brand. That's a good question. Okay, I'll go through this fairly quick. I know we don't have a ton of time, and I want to make sure to leave questions. This is a reinvent of the Under Armour design ethos. And when they were interviewing me, they kept asking me to do things that I just didn't believe in. Like they asked me to create this document. If you've ever done like a corporate identity graphic design work where you do the logo and you build this Bible of all the ways you can't use a logo and all the ways you can. A lot of companies try to do that for design. And I just don't believe in it because it creates this scenario where 2 or 3 people are telling everybody else what to do. And at Under Armour, we have 139 designers between footwear, apparel, outerwear is a little different. We have 3 or 4 there. Accessories, color, and graphic. And then within graphic, you have print and pattern and some specialization. The chances of 3 or 4 people with me deciding what everything should look like and us getting it right, those odds are pretty low. If you've got 139 people all working together as this collective, trying to figure out what we should be, our odds are way better. Now, you still requires some parental supervision, but that's the balance we're trying to strike. So we call it the collective, and instead of having these big seasonal kickoffs twice a year, like, okay, it's spring, everything's going to look like a frog for the spring. Companies do that. We're treating it like an operating system because with all the timelines we have, we're basically talking and kicking off designs year-round. So we think of it more like an operating system. We're going to make updates as we go, and occasionally we're going to do big updates. But it's more of a progression so that the things we've designed that are great, the next version doesn't have to be a reinvention. It can be an evolution. And hopefully, we don't even have to reinvent it. We can just let it keep going. So I'm focusing on principles and values, and I kind of go through these. The momentum one I just talked about. If there's something that's been working in your category, if you've got great designs from last season, you don't need to reinvent and start over again. Your chances of being successful every single time are pretty slim. So you build on what's been working season to season. This girl, curiosity is a huge one. I think this is one of my fundamental design principles. It's just being curious about the world and exploring. This girl's name is Claire Ma. She's a 6th grader, not anymore, but she was a 6th grader who won the essay contest to name the Mars Curiosity rover. So if you get a minute, read her essay. It's fantastic. There's a great link between curiosity and creativity, and it's just a way to kind of fill up your creative bucket. I highlight being a maker all the time, and I push really hard for our designers to be in factories, to learn about manufacturing, to learn what the constraints are. There's a big difference between being a sculptor and a fine artist and being an industrial designer, and I think you've got to kind of have that clear in your head. I like this example because Charles Eames was partners with an architect named Earl Saranen, who designed the GM Tech Center that I worked in. The two of them, when they were younger, tried to make furniture like this laminated plywood and get these really crazy contoured shapes, and it just kept not working. It was causing stress between the two. And finally, they just upholstered the chair, and they still won a bunch of awards. But they just never really cracked that puzzle. During World War II, Charles Eames was he was part of a design effort for the war, and he was designing wooden splints, where he had to mass manufacture wooden splints, and he had to learn all about the constraints of manufacturing laminated wood. So with all that knowledge, after he had been through the realities of the manufacturing, he came back and started designing furniture like this. So I love this example because it shows how embracing the constraints of the manufacturing process can lead to really great designs, timeless designs. Collaboration is a huge one. I've hired some of the best designers I know, and if they can't get along with other people in the team, it just doesn't work. Really, really, really talented a-holes don't work in most companies. And I remember one time I had a designer who was really talented, and he just started being a jerk to everyone for about 2 weeks. And I couldn't figure out what was going on, and it clicked. And I finally pulled him aside and I said, "Are you reading the Steve Jobs book by Walter Isaacson?" He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "You can't act like Steve Jobs." Like he thought that Steve Jobs' mentality of just being a jerk to everyone was the right way and stuff. I mean, it obviously helped Apple, but that's pretty rare, I think. So I push really hard for the PLMs, the developers, the engineers, the designers to travel together, to share insights together. If we had this earlier this week, if Jordan Spieth's coming in to try on clothes, the designers better be invited because they designed the clothes. Right? So just collaborating and getting along seems super easy, but it's actually quite a challenge. Empathy, kind of went through the one in the helmet. Just understanding what is really important to a climber allowed us to make this decision. And I think that's why empathy is a huge one, just getting really, really close to the people you're working with. Simplicity, again, as I was thinking about it, John Anderson, the professor in advertising here, showed these fantastic examples of old Volkswagen ads that just had one word and a beautiful photo, sometimes 2 words, and those 2 words captured everything. This Hemingway quote is from a book called A Movable Feast, and it's not really an autobiography, but it kind of is, because it's about him living in Europe and being a writer, and part of it he talks about backcountry skiing, so that's why I was excited about it. But then this quote here is from the book, and he talks about his writing process, where he was starting to write, and then he would just trim back the scroll work, trim back the things that weren't necessary, until you just had kind of the purity of your idea. And that's tricky, because sometimes that scroll work, they're things that you're attached to. They're things you put a lot of time into. Doesn't mean they're the right thing. And so that's where editing, having a good friend who's an editor, having trusted designers you can reflect on your work with will help you do some of that painful editing. But that process of focusing in on the things that are most essential is really, really key to making a great design. I use this slide because Jeff Bezos, in his home, has a library. I don't know if any of you have read about this. In his library, there are 2 fireplaces on either end. And over each one is a sign. One says builders and one says dreamers, and he's segmented those books accordingly. So he's got dreamer books and builder books. And you see this dynamic where you kind of have to have both. And I would say to be a really successful designer long term, you kind of have to be both. You have to be able to be big enough in your scope and your imagination, and don't be afraid to be bold and think big. And then you have to also flip over and realize that this stuff still has to get made, it still has to be used by people. There's a reality there, and so there's a really delicate balance. And so balance, again, is another big priority, which is why we talk about it a ton. It's one of the ones that I kick off the most. The last thing I'll go through really fast is this. And again, this looks simple, but this has been part of our design ethos now at Under Armour, where these are 3 elements. And companies always struggle balancing art and science. They struggle balancing form and function, performance and style. You can swap out the words, and I like the term complementary opposites. They're words that are kind of opposite, but they also complement one another. And think about a running brand. A running brand is going to be way more on the side of science, most likely. Someone like Brooks, someone like Asics. They've got to perform, and runners need that shoe to be the same every season. So running companies, Nike, Adidas, Under Armour, always struggle because you have these two silos in run. One is like hyper-focused on specialty run and like real short runners. And then all the other people who just want cool-looking running shoes, who also run sometimes. Team sports athletes who have to run a few miles a week for practice, they're not runners. So in running, figuring out that separation is always tricky. That same challenge doesn't exist in basketball. Because basketball shoes, they have to perform, they have to work on court, but they also look great because that's part of the culture of basketball. So we are always struggling to find that balance, and my premise is, and part of my point of view is, I'm going to skip this really quick, is that the culture of the sport is the thing that helps you balance those other two variables. And so this top picture is from last summer. It's a 7-on-7 football tournament. And why would this kid stuff his gloves in his socks? Until you've been to a 7-on-7 tournament and hung out and watched all the crazy things kids do, you don't understand like the level of showmanship, the energy, kind of the swagger and the attitude. We made these headbands that went from kind of your forehead up and let the heat, like a balaclava up for your head. Immediately, kids were putting them over their face with the Under Armour logo right over their mouth. Looked super cool. Probably made 0 sense for being able to breathe while you're running routes, but it didn't matter. It kind of showed the culture of that sport. And so something that I push really hard for is for our designers to spend time in the field, in locker rooms, with kids, on a volleyball bus, in a softball dugout. You know, we have lots of college teams we can work with. Really spending time with them to understand and get that balance right. So, and then this is another example of it. Our graphic design team started data mining all the social media feeds from a couple of these key athletes and then categorizing it to start to capture another way, a less expensive way if you don't have teams you can go visit all over the country. A great way to just dive in and understand their personalities and culture and then let that come to life in product. And we just showed this 2 weeks ago, and the product that goes with this you won't see until spring 21. It's the best. It's some of the best stuff, and it coincides with the 25th anniversary of Under Armour. It also re-emphasizes the origins of Under Armour starting in American football. And so I'm super excited about this because of the prep work that went into it, and because of the design work that's going to be coming. Again, this is more about the culture. Last one. This is me when I was a kid. And I think it's great because this photo was probably taken in, my mom can help me, 94, 93, right in there somewhere. Notice that shirt, that super baggy, cottony shirt. This is 2 years before Under Armour even became a thing. And that heavy, sloppy cotton shirt is the reason why Under Armour exists in the first place. It's Plank figured out that that's just inefficient. The data says that if you wear a more compressive, water-wicking, sweat-wicking base layer under your pads, you get, it's like 8 or 9% better endurance over time. So there's some great performance reasons there. But that spiral is also super tight. So let's end it there. Oh, one last thing actually. All of that work, that's all the fundamental stuff. We still run it through something we call the DNA filter, which is acknowledging the products from Under Armour's history that have been great, that have had really good insights, that have had visual connection, that are intuitive, that mean something to the brand. So we don't move on from that. I think one of the challenges Under Armour's had is by reinventing so fast and so often, a lot of the great stuff is just edited out. Some of the stuff doesn't even make it into the film. It's still on the cutting room floor. I've been really surprised to see how many great things, footwear and apparel related and accessory related, are all over the place. So it is part of what makes me excited for the future of what I'm doing. These are some examples of those. Like the Speedform shoe in the middle is the first shoe made at a bra factory. Really, really comfy, really interesting. They got scared and stopped making it. We'll start making those. Anyway. Any questions?
So, what techniques would you recommend for developing that empathy that you would refer to when you're not directly part of, I guess, like the target sport or target community? It's like, for example, if I want to go into developing climbing shoes that are more for like big wall kind of stuff, but I'm not a big wall climber, how would you recommend I guess, what direction would you put me in to develop that empathy to know how to design for those big wall climbers and based off of footwear?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't think you have to become a big wall climber. I'm not a big wall climber, and I design some big wall climbing shoes. You do have to get really close. Like, I think you really do need to spend time with big wall climbers, talk to them. You have to develop some skills of understanding what they're saying when they're not saying it. Body language is a huge one. I mean, sitting down with an athlete, if you've seen Free Solo, sitting down with Alex Honnold and getting him to explain why something's good or bad is really hard. Because he doesn't need anything to be good because he's so good. So like teasing feedback out of him is really hard. A lot of times athletes want to be nice. We had Steph Curry in a month ago, and he doesn't want to tell people that their stuff sucks. So he's going to kind of dance around and kind of hem and haw a little bit, and he'll try to say the thing he likes, and then you got to push him. You got to dig a little bit. Dwayne the Rock, he sent us a video clip 2 or 3 weeks ago on his new shoe. It's for the PR3, and it was brutal. It was a video of him looking at his foot, sending this video to the designer, and he was full of expletives. And he's like, guys, what the F is this thing? This is the worst shoe I've ever had on my foot. How could you have used these materials? How could you do this? What's all this bagginess? And it was brutal. Being close to the end users is really important. Observing. IDEO does a great job of this. There's some good books from IDEO about their process. It's a human observation techniques that help. I learned one of my student projects when I was young, maybe my senior year at BYU, was cigarette racing boats for Baja Marine. If you don't know what those are, they're the long, skinny ones, middle-aged guys, people my age with Hawaiian shirts and gold chains, back then anyway. And I thought, what do I know about cigarette boats? Like, the only boats I care about are wakeboarding boats. And so I was with my family on a trip to Florida, and we just stopped by and looked really quick at one of the marinas, and I could see all these boats. And I could see the kind of people that were using them. And then I started watching videos from Baja that they would send. And I realized that the people buying those boats were really like me. They just wanted to do things that were really fun, really fast. Those boats had twin engines in the back, and they'd catch tons of air. And then they would land sideways sometimes because they would catch so much air, which is why the sides had to be so tall and so smooth. And the chairs had to be like racing seats. And as soon as I understood why people spent that much money on a boat that would go that fast in a straight line, once I understood it, then I felt like I was qualified to make all the other decisions that they would want me to make on the boat. So it's a good question.
What kind of skills would you suggest that we start practicing now if we want to go kind of in the direction that you went into more, apparel and shoe design? Like, would you suggest practicing sketching or practicing more maybe with some application interfaces, or what skills would you suggest?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've kind of changed starting at GM, I thought sketching was everything. And as I phased through, sketching is still important, but it's not the only thing. It a little bit depends on what industry you're in. I like to quote myself when I say, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, a prototype's worth 1,000 pictures. And there's certain things, the reason why sketching is so important in the car world is because making a prototype out of clay is really hard. If the prototyping methods are a little bit easier, I think the burden on sketching starts to move away. So if you can start patterning, if you can start making, if you can start physically building things, I think that's almost just as important. It depends a little bit on the culture of the company you're at. Are you a freelancer where you're just doing it for yourself and the only thing you show is the end product? If you have to show concepts, though, to a client or to a bigger brand or a company, if I have to show what the future of something's going to look like to the GMs of the category, we can't make that many prototypes, so we just have to do really good sketches and really good renderings. We're playing with a lot of 3D software for visualizing shoes and apparel. One of the best footwear designers that I knew when I was at Nike, her name was Nuria Hansen. I don't even know where she's at now. And when I met her, she really didn't draw at all. She had taken the last, you guys all know what a last is, I'm pretty sure, the thing that shoes made around. She had made foam versions of her own, like basically really dense Nerf football, PU foam versions of the last. And she would treat the last like a dress form, and she would drape materials, pin materials, get all the proportions right, figure out the routings of straps and things like that. So she basically had a concept, and then she would work with the model shop to make a midsole and outsole combination that she could put on that. So she never she never had drawings. She would just build these really realistic, material accurate mock-ups that were really good. So crap-ups, hack-ups, mock-ups, prototypes, provocative prototypes, lots of different words to explain the same thing, but I think getting real pretty quick. It's easy to get lost in your own world drawing, and that can become a thing. There's people, I mean, if you're a concept artist, that's really what your job would be. I tend to lean way heavily towards making stuff, and that's why I like to push our designers to go to factories and really get their hands on it. It's a great place.
So if you had to choose one or two of your work experiences, or even one or two people who have had the most influence on your career, what would you choose?
That's a good question. If I'm just talking kind of professionally, one of them was probably a creative director that I had at Nike. His name was Andreas Harlow. He gave me the chance to get out of the kitchen and get into inline, which was hard to do at the time. No one trusted the kitchen designers because they hadn't done the kind of the seasonal rigor. He had me read an essay by Jasper Morrison called Super Normal. You guys read that? It's about just pure, clean, timeless design. It's great. You should read that. And it was Jasper Morrison and somebody else. I can't remember the name of the guy. He helped me understand like the simplicity of just refining my designs. Like having one or two key stories. I think designers, especially if you finally have a chance to have your work be shown to the world, you want it all to be shown all at the same time. So it's easy to, like I had the harness designers at Black Diamond. We built a lab so they could start prototyping harnesses. We set them up with a couple of factory partners where they were there all the time, and they invented like 15 years worth of stuff, and they wanted to spend it all in 2 years. And it was just too much. It was too much for the world to process and digest and understand, and so we had to slow them down. So that simplifying and refinement is probably something I learned from him. I think some of it actually comes down to like Alan Hashimoto here. Did you know Alan?
Yeah.
He used to teach a principle about the balance of harmony and variety. And to me, that's another example of those complementary opposites. In a successful design, if it's, and I'll use Alan's analogies because it was so impactful. He's like, if you're planning a party and you only invited football players, that's a really boring party. You've got way too much harmony in that party. If you plan a party, which I made this mistake when I lived here, and you invite one or two of every one of your friends from all the different groups you know, and you got a party where no one knows anyone, it's just destined to fail because people just don't know anyone. You got way too much variety. So finding the right balance there is key, and that's been something that I use. I still use it now. It's cooked into our design ethos at Under Armour. It's cooked into how you have a brand that is a unified brand. It's got the right amount of harmony in the brand, but then it's got the right amount of variety in each category. So I'd probably say those two. Good question.
All right, we probably got time for like one more.
Could you give us an example of how you use that in the brand?
Where, Under Armour?
Yeah, like what does that look like with a product?
Okay, that's a good question. Let me. So I can give you some examples of products that I think do it.
Okay.
And I think some of the new Nike running shoes, like the Breaking 2, the Sub whatevers, like those are beautiful shoes that people will wear all day long. They also perform super well. So that's finding those. That's more finding the axis of performance and kind of the axis of performance and beauty and art. I would say maybe an example of too much harmony, at least from my perspective, and you can argue about this is a philosophy, when a lot of brands do Olympic product, because it's going to be, or World Cup maybe, World Cup footwear, they want to make everything look the same. And so you get a product line that is one-dimensional. So Under Armour is making this mistake where we have a lot of t-shirts, we have tons of really technical fabrics, and we put giant logos on all of them. The heartbeat logo, the symbol we call it, on all of them. So there's too much harmony there. If you want a giant logo t-shirt, we've got you covered because we've got like 50. If you don't, you're out of luck. You don't have it. So you got to get that blend right, and especially senior leaders at a company, maybe a president or a CEO or founder, they want to have that sense of pride that wherever they are, they see all the Under Armour stuff and it all looks the same. The problem is that much harmony, you're going to capture the same people all the time. You got to have enough variety to then be relevant to kind of the edges of the consumer group, but not too much, because then you look like 5 or 6 different brands. It's probably the best way I can describe it.
All right. Well, let's give him a hand. Appreciate you coming in.